is new. My world, the chaos around me, what I've known to be true. We think we know, but do we? Tick tock of the clock, and I see hands going all directions. Can't see your face, but I see worry in my own reflections. Something tells me you've seen this face before. Redemption waits for you, I'm sure. I see your eyes in the moon.
Hey friends, welcome to Impossible Conversations. I'm Brandy.
I'm Sean. How's it going?
We have a very interesting show. I think every show we do is interesting. I that's why I'm doing it, because I think it's fun and it's interesting, and I just love talking about these things. So how are things in New York, Sean?
Good. Yeah, status quo. They lifted some of the mask mandates and things like that. So
I heard that.
Hochul's releasing her grip a tiny bit, not a lot, but a little.
How's the response? How's the response?
From what I've seen so far, out here in Long Island where I'm at, it's not insanely different. Many people weren't wearing masks generally. In stores, I think, in larger stores, I think some people were, but it just seems to be that most people are now wearing masks. I am seeing a much larger uptick in restaurant attendance. So when I walked into restaurants, that could also be, we just passed Valentine's Day. So I was there and I was in a restaurant on Valentine's Day and it was mobbed. So I haven't seen a crowd that large in a restaurant in a long time, no matter when I've been in. So it seems to be better. I think people are venturing out a little bit more, which is nice, so.
Yeah, that is good news.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know I don't keep abreast of the case counts or how.
Yeah, I haven't been, and I don't even think they're counting really much anymore. They're not really keeping track of anything anymore.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing how that happens.
Right?
Yeah, it went from to slow the spread to stop overloading the hospitals, and then it went to stop people from dying. Then it went to stop people from getting it. Then it went to, well, we have to keep the cases down. And it just, the science is changing, as they say, the science has changed.
And science seems to be different in every state. I don't know.
Yeah, geographically, the science has changed geographically. Yeah, it's pretty amazing how things have progressed, and
Yes, very, very strange.
Yeah.
And yet things are opening up. People are putting the mask down.
Mm-hmm.
There's some are still pushing vaccine mandates and passports.
Yeah.
We're still hearing about this and how they want to make this a thing. And that begs the question, why? Why do things have to be different and going in that direction? So I read something today, or yesterday rather, that made me very curious. And I know that when I bring up this parallel to what's happening today, I get a lot of pushback. So I saw this quote by Sacha Baron Cohen, and it says, when I was in university, I studied history, and there was this one major historian of the Third Reich, Ian Kershaw, and his quote was, "The path to Auschwitz was paved with indifference." I know it's not very funny being a comedian talking about Holocaust, but I think it's an interesting idea that not everyone in Germany had to be a raving anti-Semite. They just had to be apathetic. So I wanted to talk about apathy versus compassion today, because I think there's a lot of misconception around what apathy is and like what compassion is. And not to say that there's not compassion on both sides of this huge thing that's happening right now. I think there is, to a lot of extent. I think that because both people really care, and it's where do we put our care, I think, is the big question. And then the inverse of that, what does apathy look like?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a great that's a great conversation. It really is. I mean, and it is a hard one to have, like you said. I've had this similar result of people completely losing it on me if I bring up the Holocaust in regards to this. And it's really not, obviously we're not really comparing the Holocaust to this. It's they're two different situations that can't be compared. You're just I think what I have been doing in the past is relating the parallel of how the Nazis gained control more in like the 20s and 30s, leading up to what happened in World War II. It's more about that than it is about the actual events of the Holocaust. So again, you're really not comparing the Holocaust to this. It's not they're not comparable, obviously. So that lead up is very, very important. You have a society closing, and this goes into a lot of what we're dealing with also with what Robert Malone called mass formation psychosis. It's the very similar kind of thing, and he even uses this parallel to good effect. I thought, and I don't think there's anything really all that crazy about using this parallel, because you have to wonder, how did we get to this point? And that's really all we're talking about at this point. It's how did we get up to here where the populace is so divided on a subject like this. And yeah, it's an interesting parallel. I mean, it really comes down to as another, I forget who the quote is. You'll probably know who it is, Brandy. But you know, um, all it takes for evil to flourish is for good men to do nothing. And that's
Oh,
that's
yeah, yeah,
that's exactly this quote. It's basically the
that's
same
right.
same exact thing,
That's right.
and that's really what it is. That apathy of like, how do uh, how could I be a product for change? What can I possibly even do? What's the point of all of it? I would venture to say that in some ways modern day governments, and not just to single out the United States or anybody necessarily, but I feel like in some ways modern day governments strive for that apathy, because they don't want people to get involved, because they
Mm,
want to be the people controlling the narrative. And I think that goes across the board. I don't think there's very many governments out there that don't want they don't want their voters very engaged, you know.
mm.
So that's another conversation almost entirely. But yeah, I mean, the apathy in the American populace right now, um, I feel better about the apathy lately, which is kind of odd, because I really feel like people are kind of awakening to like, I could be more involved in this change.
Mm.
And there are some out there who say that like maybe the United States or the world governments are literally pushing our buttons to find out how far they can get us to go, where we are going to say enough of this, we're going to rebel, and then they'll retreat and go, okay, now we know how far we can go. And I don't necessarily disagree. I think governments would be stupid not to do things like that occasionally, to find out where the populace is with regard to how far they can be pushed. And you know, they
Yeah.
don't want the populace to get out of control any more than we want the populace to get out of control, because then you'll end up in anarchy, and it starts to get, you're on a dangerous precipice at that point. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation. It's multifaceted because there's so much involved in it.
Exactly. And, to your point about let's see how far we can push them, when I think about the Freedom Convoy right now
Hmm.
in Canada and
It's
the
incredible
recent
what's happening to them.
action.
I can't even believe. I mean, it's basically like, Trudeau has now imposed martial law, essentially.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
it's pretty much the exact same thing as martial law in this country, which is, I cannot even believe what's happening.
yeah, yeah. I think you posted something recently about they're turning off the funding
Yeah.
basically. You can't we're shutting down your bank accounts, we're shutting down any
They're
kind of
taking
money.
away their vehicle insurance, not even their bank accounts. They're
Wow.
literally taking away their vehicle insurance and their corporate insurance of
And
that
these
stuff.
people have families.
Yeah.
These people
And
have
and
lives.
these are not violent protests. I mean, you
No,
can see what's going
not at
on.
all.
They're honking, and they made honking illegal, where you could go to jail for honking your horn. I mean, it's just,
Right.
and this is really scary stuff. This is the same kind of, you know, these measures are even worse than probably what happened in Germany during, the lead up, because, Germany, and Hitler, they were rallying the troops, and, the motherland and all this other stuff, and trying to get all this fear and angst that was building up in the German people back then, to
Mhm,
kind of rally around the homeland.
mhm.
Whereas I don't see that as Trudeau's kind of thing. This is not about anything like that. It's just about totalitarianism, and he's just
Yes.
He's
Wait,
just doing this to the populace. No, you're not going to resist, you know?
but you said it, leading up to the fear and angst,
Yeah,
playing on the fear and angst. What
exactly.
just happened that created
Mhm.
all this fear and angst in our world?
As Dr. Robert Malone he called it, free floating fear, you know,
Yes,
with no real cause and no real person or entity to blame. It's
right.
just free floating in the air as if it's just
Well,
pervasive, you know?
there is, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
obviously.
there is, and however, it was not obvious to most people who listen to the news, who watch things. But for people who have a very healthy skepticism of our government, and we kind of watched as that things unfolded, and some of us said this is a bioweapon, and it was constructed, and it was used on our own people from our own government. Oh, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, even
That would never
suggesting that
happen.
it could have started in a lab. Just that
Right.
suggestion was grounds for being removed from Facebook, removed from YouTube, removed from everywhere. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, that's pretty possible, you know. So yeah, yeah.
Isn't that
Mhm.
interesting? But back to that fear and leveraging fear. What's that saying? Never let a good crisis go to waste.
Mhm.
I really think there is a play on that. And so, where is the apathy really coming from when we talk about, the response, Canadian government response and Trudeau's response to people just wanting freedom and people just wanting to say, I just want the choice of what gets in my body
Mhm.
and to be able to thrive and live. Why has that become such a horrible thing in our world? And it's not. So I wanted to talk about kind of the other side of this because you and I tend to see eye to eye on a lot of things, and
Mhm.
so I sometimes feel like it's not fair. We don't have somebody else who's
Yep.
talking about their perspective that kind of goes against what we say. But I
Yep.
found something on a friend's.
As we move forward, of course, we'll get guests on that have,
Definitely.
counter to, the and it's also I don't think that we also see eye to eye. I think generally we just have an open mind. I think, and that,
Mm,
and that's kind of what this whole show is really about. So
mm,
I don't think there's anything wrong. But yeah, I think we could probably, find someone who might be dichotomy, like totally the opposite to us, diametrically
right.
opposed to us, and
And
we
that'd
can
be
figure that
okay.
out.
That's
No,
what
absolutely,
exactly.
yeah, absolutely,
That's what this is about. And I
yeah,
really want to invite anyone out there listening today, if you have a counter opinion to what we're saying, we'd love to hear from you. We
absolutely.
want to talk to you. I want to understand
Hmm.
what the other side really sounds like and really has to say about what we're talking about, because I think it's important. This is the whole reason for this show is conversation. Let's
Exactly.
talk about what this is. We're not going to try to change their mind. We might say what we think and feel, or ask questions. And I
Hmm.
would love for people to ask us questions, because I would be, yes, I want that dialogue. So on a friend's page, Facebook page the other day, I did find somebody who was willing to. They didn't obviously they don't want to come on, but they have some not contrary, but their own opinion about what's happening. And this person is out of New Zealand, and what she said is, I visited the protests today and was so saddened. The tragedy is all the energy and passion, globally it appears, could be going into addressing climate change or low pay rates and exploitation, or equity for access to healthcare and education for children, etc. Real and terrible problems around the globe, like the Occupy movement, Black Lives Matter, or Extinction Rebellion. I don't know what that is, but I'm curious about it. But instead, it's primarily seeking freedom from masks and vaccines, and keeps going on about failing children, question mark, who, by the way, are not subject to banning mandates, and appears to more than anything want the government, this is hard to read, but more than the government, to let more vulnerable members of society have more chance to get sick and die, question mark. The energy and passion of good people has been misdirected by lies. It really is tragic for them. I found that a very interesting perspective. Mostly because some of what that person said, I feel that way too on a lot of points that she had, but also sometimes I feel like the inverse is true. Sometimes I feel like people have been lied to in the mainstream media and by government, and they're acting accordingly. Same, and it sounds like they feel the same way about people like me who want more freedom to say what goes into my body, and to not allow, like say children, for example, to be subject to masking and vaccines, which I think can be very dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I understand where she's coming from. Dr. Richard Wolff, the economist, talked about this on Jimmy Dore's show the other day. Jimmy Dore's great. I love him. He's a very interesting character, Jimmy, because he's a lefty at heart, and but he's probably being called a right winger, just like Russell Brand is being called a right winger lately.
Right?
As soon as you have any sort of thoughts on the other side of the spectrum, you're right wing, just like I've been called right wing over the last several years. But yeah, it's very interesting. And Richard Wolff brought up this exact point. He said, and Jimmy asked him a very pointed question, and I thought that was interesting. He basically said, what do you think about the truckers? And essentially said, what do you think is going on here? And I forget exactly how the question was framed, but it was framed in such a way that I felt it was pretty pointed, and Richard kind of went around the question a little bit and brought up those points that you just mentioned, that this could be used for better, furtherment, that the vaccines are just the camel that broke the straw, the camel that broke the straw's back, the straw that broke the camel's back. Excuse me. That was funny. So yeah, and he initially, Richard Wolff really kind of again kind of avoided the question, and Jimmy redirected him back. And it was an interesting conversation because at the end, Richard did say, well, we can't really control what wakes the populace up at the end of the day. If it takes this sort of a thing to wake the populace up and realize they can affect decent change, and really, kind of put the the focus back on the government and get them to do their job and things. He's like, then so be it. That's great that they used this opportunity to do that. But he thinks that again, like she was saying, that we could be doing this for other more important things. Now, I'm not sure that I agree with that necessarily. I really think that this is a very important stepping stone, because I think it's really a lead in to a lot of worse things that can come from allowing something like this to happen. And that's the apathy we were talking about initially. I really feel, yeah, absolutely.
Continue talking. I have to go. I have a technical issue, but keep.
Oh, okay, sure.
Keep talking.
So basically, yeah, I'll pretend you're still here. I really think that apathy is still there, and really, what's going on is that this is a stepping stone to something much larger. I think, in my opinion, allowing things like vaccine mandates and other surveillance techniques, if you want to call them surveillance, quotes, I don't think is a good idea, because, you look at what's happening in China with like social scores and things like that. It's turning into a Black Mirror. It's turning into a Black Mirror episode is really what's happening. And this has been talked about, forever. The last several years have really gone down this road where things on shows like Black Mirror and others that are very dark dystopian futures are not that far off. And it's extremely scary to me. That social credit score kind of thing that happens in a couple of those Dark Mirror episodes is really coming to life. And if we allow, excuse me, something like a vaccine mandate, or allow something like them being able to shut off, funding to these truckers just because they're protesting peacefully. Now, let's look at the inverse. I mean, the inverse in America, we had a full summer of, like virtual riots where people were burning businesses, and I feel like there wasn't nearly the amount of pushback that Trudeau is now. He's now literally declared martial law on his people. That's insane to me. That if the Canadian people, who are, pretty much the most law-abiding people on the planet, arguably, if they are at the point where they are willing to shut down their supply chain in their cities, and with a ridiculously peaceful protests, just sitting in your trucks honking horns, and you get martial law declared, that's pretty powerful. So, I'm it's hopeful to me that the apathy that we're seeing and we have seen for the last several years, and that fear is now coming to a head, where people are getting sick of the nonsense, and they're going, no, we're not going to tolerate this anymore. And again, there absolutely is another side to this, and I can totally see what they're saying. I think this kind of excuse me, civil disobedience, or this kind of uproar could be well used for other things. But again, just like this is a straw that broke the camel's back, it's also the impetus that gives the populace that kind of courage. It's that shot of whiskey to kind of go down, and then a little while later you're like, okay, I'm gonna get up and sing that song I've never sung before, because that's really what that fear is still there.
Mhm.
And I think that's really where a lot of this apathy is coming from. It's coming from that free floating fear, like Dr. Malone, quoted. And I think that's really what's going on. And I think once that fear is lifted from the populace, I think many other things, a lot of other dominoes will fall after this.
Yes.
And that's one thing that I've been very disappointed seeing in some people around me, and it's that a lot of people caved to these demands and didn't stand their ground. That I think had a mass amount of people. There was a school in Los Angeles, I think, that I think something like 3,000 kids, or maybe even more than that, stood their ground, and they just got rid of their vaccine mandate entirely, because they were like, we can't have these people just dropping out of this school.
Right.
And had we all done that, if we felt the need to do that, which many people don't feel the need, and that's completely fine. I have no problem I'm not an anti-vaxxer by any stretch of the imagination. I'm anti-mandate. I'm anti them telling you have to take this or you will lose your job. But that's not forced. No, that is forced.
Mhm.
That's coercion, and that's force. You are forcing someone into an ultimatum that they don't want to be in. So that is force. I don't care what people say about that. That's one hill I will die on. you know.
No, you're
So
absolutely right.
I
Yeah.
find it interesting, but I feel like this trucker thing is huge, because I mean, Canada's doing what the Americans didn't have the courage to do, because no one really was, everyone was just running around fearful and scared and going, I can't do anything about this. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my job. And a lot of people caved to the demands of the totalitarians who were trying to push this on people. And it's sad, but
Yeah.
I'm glad they're doing what they're doing. And I really think that this could be, the beginning of hopefully a lot of dominoes falling for this kind of nonsense from governments being able to push things like this on their populace. But
Yeah, I wanna be hopeful, right? Like,
I do
part of
too.
me.
That's the thing. At the end of the day, I might be skeptical as all get out,
I
but
know,
I'm
me too.
extremely hopeful generally. And I'm a total, like, I'm a walking contradiction.
Well, but, if we look at the history and how these things work, I mean, it's give a little, pull back, give and pull back, because if they just went all out and said, no, we're going to continue lockdowns, we're going to
Yeah,
continue back to past, there would be an uprising,
yeah,
right? Like,
very true. Yeah. Mhm.
no, absolutely. But instead, and in some areas it's different
Yeah.
too,
Well, yeah, that's
right?
the thing. A lot of the provinces are, a couple of the provinces had opened up directly after. And that's what happens. This is like, trickle down economics, but it's trickle down social, economics, where it's like all of a
Mm.
sudden the people who are leading these provinces are now getting the courage that the people are giving them. They're
Mhm.
mandating the courage upwards at this point, where it's like, all these people are doing this. Now these people who are leading these provinces are saying, you know what? Yeah, we're not doing this anymore. That's it. We're opening up. And numerous provinces have done that already in Canada. And
Right.
that would not have happened without these truckers. So,
I agree.
this
Yeah.
this will lead upwards. The people have to start, we have to start at the bottom and then go up. And
Mhm.
that's very much what Bernie talked about. This is Bernie Sanders thinking all the way right
Mhm.
now. I hate to
Mhm.
bring up Bernie again, but I mean I gotta show my little Bernie again. But
Yeah, there's Bernie.
I always have him on my desk. But yeah, I mean, this is entirely Bernie Sanders thinking. If you're going to lead a revolution, it's not going to be
Yes.
televised. There's going to be
Mm-mm.
so many lies painted on the media about this stuff, that people were believing that there's Nazis involved here. And I'm like, it's just ridiculous. This is about my body, my choice. Now, whatever happened to
Right.
that? That was supposed to be the left's calling card for so
I
many
don't
years.
understand. I wanna understand. Like, I want to talk to people who say it's different. Help me understand,
I
how is
think
it different?
I will speak from what I've heard from other people
Please.
and from people I very much trust and I'm friends with.
Mhm.
A lot of people truly believe that this was for the better good, that they were getting their vaccine for the greater good. just like every other vaccine, where it's like, oh, we're going to get to herd immunity, and there's your lies right there, coming
Whereas
from mainstream media. In the beginning, they were telling you if you get vaccinated, it's going to stop with you. Even the president was saying this.
So question though, okay,
Hmm.
and I hear that
Hmm.
they're saying, "Oh, okay, we're gonna get vax because it protects everybody, it protects other people."
Yeah.
Whereas abortion, for example, like that's just an isolated thing. Like
Hmm.
they don't think they're impacting anybody else's life by having an abortion and not creating life and bringing life into the
Yep.
world. That's what I'm confused about.
Again, I mean, there's tons of hypocrisy on both sides. So you really, and I would say someone's answer to that might be like, well, the right wing is all about pro-life until the baby comes, and then they just drop the baby, like, and I don't know. But the thing about that is that that's a personal choice that I think should exist. I think making it illegal is just going to give it more power, like everything.
Absolutely.
But I really do think that that's something that should be out there, available for people if
Mm,
they really need it.
mm.
But to say that, one side or the other side will drop them, like, that happens on both sides. And that's just that's
Mhm.
not a objective thing that you can say will happen on one side or the other. That
Yeah,
happens
I'm just
anywhere.
trying to
Yeah.
understand the thinking and the logic
Yeah.
behind one thing is true unless this is happening, but it's not true if this is happening. And so I just want to understand the logic and the thinking
Yeah.
because
I've never heard
that
anyone
helps
really explain it
me.
to me. Yeah. I don't think
Okay.
I've heard anyone logically explain it to
If
me where I
anybody
felt,
listening today would
yeah,
like to
comments,
chime in
please.
on
Yeah.
that, I would love an explanation, an understanding, because I want
Absolutely.
to understand. It's not like I want to, argue or debate about it. Like
Yeah.
I want to understand the thinking behind it so that I can get it right in my mind about what what this is really about.
Yeah, my
That's what I want
guess,
to know.
yeah, exactly. I agree with you completely. I'd love to hear a real logical, like, pure
Mhm.
explanation as to why people would feel that way. I really do think, though, that a lot of people think that, like, it's for the greater good. But yes, you're right. I mean, abortion isn't, that's a personal choice entirely that really only affects you and the baby. I mean,
But not true.
it affects everybody around you as well, obviously, but
That's right. It
that's
affects it.
directly, obviously, yes.
And speaking as someone who has had children and
Hmm.
had an abortion,
Hmm.
I want to say a being that is growing up into the world, like a person, they affect
Oh yeah.
countless
Oh my, yeah,
lives.
I can't even imagine. Yeah, it's amazing.
So to say that I'm going to choose to not give this person life is saying I don't there's apathy. I'm sorry. And I'm
Hmm.
going to speak from my own personal experience. I was apathetic and very much self-loathing. I want to get into that too because I think that the two go hand in hand.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, as a man, I can only imagine.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
There was so much hate and anger inside of me that and hate for myself, but also hate for the world. I
Hmm.
didn't want to bring another being into
Yep.
the world. I
That's
did
very common,
and I
obviously.
thought I was being compassionate.
Hmm.
I thought my
Oh yeah,
logic
you can
said
convince yourself a lot of different things
right?
when you're in pain. Yeah, absolutely.
I thought I was being compassionate, but the truth is, after I had children and saw their impact on the world and on other people, forget like just what happens during the first few years of life, okay? Because that could be hard and that could be difficult and that can be challenging. The cost of raising a child, like,
Hmm.
there's um, all these reasons why someone may want to have an abortion, and I get it. I understand, and I can tell you if somebody would try to convince me otherwise at that time, it wasn't going to happen,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
So I get how deep into our beliefs and programming and anger and emotions we can be when we're making these kinds of decisions. But what they don't think about, or I didn't think about anyway, is how a person's life can impact thousands,
Hmm.
millions. I mean, it is incredible when you think about how many lives we touch. Just you, Sean, for example, as
Yeah.
a musician,
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, it's amazing, and this is an interesting topic. Now that it's turned towards this side, there's one thing that I've been thinking about for a long period of time, and it's the other side of this conversation is, you know, besides abortion, what other my body, my choice kind of things are happening? I was considered a miracle baby, back when I was born. I was a premature kid, with many, many health issues because of my parents and, a lot of medical things that went on. And they were RH imbalanced, the two of them. And this is in the 70s. So, they didn't have the shot that they give you now after your first child, where if you're RH imbalanced between your parents, you can actually get the shot and then your mother is fine for the next couple of pregnancies. God bless you. I
Thank you.
didn't hear it, but I saw it.
Yeah, thank you.
So so my mother's second childbirth was very difficult, and mine was very difficult. She nearly died both times. I nearly died as well, and they got me back to life. I was jaundiced. They had me in an incubator with the lights on me and everything. And God knows how many people, how many transfusions I received. I don't even know.
Wow.
So I had a lot of, technology used on me to keep me alive. So there are times where I really think about that, and I spiral out into some places where I go, am I supposed to be here? Was I supposed to die? There's a lot of very interesting things that go on in your mind when you start to like let yourself kind of trail off into that. And
Yeah.
I've thought about that, and I'm like, wow, the amount of people that I've affected in my life, through just social media and just in my life, good or bad. I'm not even talking about the good necessarily, because I'm sure I'm someone's very much hated Facebook feed that they never want to see again, and they blocked me, and they will never see me again. So I know that I'm not like some angel at all. So for me, it's very interesting to think about that and how the world would be different without me in it. And it is really, there's a grandioseness to that you don't want to really embrace too much, because you don't want to get egotistical. But yes, I mean, every life has a very, very distinct effect for good or for evil, no matter what that might be. And who knows what those ends lead to. So, and obviously there are countless movies about this kind of stuff where, you start to talk about, especially changing with time travel. You start to change, events that,
Oh, yeah.
what is one person, if you take one person out in the past, what is it like? Like the movie Looper, for instance, is a fantastic movie on time travel, because it really does get into that very
Yeah,
deeply, and
it is
it's
good. I've seen it.
mind-bogglingly great. But that's the interesting part of this whole thing. So yeah, I mean, and to bring it back to where the conversation was, what are you doing with regard to that? And yes, the vaccine is very different, because yes, does it affect other people? I think the lie was that it did affect other people, and that's where a lot of these people who are pro-choice, and would be rightfully angry when when or if abortion would be banned or something like that. I think these people rectify it in that way, where they go, well, this is for the greater good, because I got this so that other people won't get the disease, because I won't get it. And they were lied to.
Yes,
And
that's true.
I wish that some of that anger of being lied to in the beginning, and a lot of them don't think that they were lied to. I won't say lied. I guess maybe lied is the wrong word.
Misled?
Misled, because they were
Mhm.
saying the science is
Misled.
changing and they weren't sure. But they did say from the very, very beginning, and I can find the quote somewhere, but Fauci did say from the beginning, the early vaccines that we get for this will not stop transmission. He did say that.
Yes, he did.
He did. He let that go at the very beginning, before we even had vaccines.
Yes.
He said that.
And he said masks don't work too.
Exactly. So
He
and
said
that's
that
the
as
thing.
well.
So there's been so much back and forth with all of this nonsense that, like, I wish that the populace would get angry, and that's exactly what's happening in Canada. However, they're not getting angry. They're being good Canadians, and they're getting angry, and they're using it to good effect to affect change within their government. And their government is reacting so harshly that I'm hopeful, let's put it that way, that Trudeau is finished, that that he is going to be ousted. Because how do you put martial law onto your people for honking horns? I mean,
No,
this is ridiculous.
no.
I mean, you are
They're
talking
not
about the
killing
biggest
people. They're not
grassroots. Yeah,
harming
they're not
anyone.
burning down cities like that was happening in America for so long. I mean, and being called mostly peaceful. It's insane that they have now. I mean, they don't use the words martial law. If they use those on TV, instead of this emergency whatever they're saying,
Right.
I think America would go, wait a minute, they're doing martial law? What?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
insane. So,
And Canada, where's the compassion? I mean,
and
it's
now
like,
you're seeing the leaders showing their true colors. That's what's going
that's
on.
right.
Trudeau is showing his true colors. This is authoritarian. This is right down, the playlist.
When I think about what's happening in Canada, I'm also thinking about, what if this happens in America? how would this even look if it happened in America? What would need to happen for martial law to be instilled? Because we had this January 6th event in Washington. I'm talking about what people are calling the insurrection.
Mhm.
And and people who some of us were
That
looking at this
lectern was
going,
very dangerous, yes.
they right? They let
Mm.
them in the
Yeah,
building.
they
How
actually let
many
them in.
how many safety protocols
And
are there?
they walked inside the velvet ropes and didn't touch anything, and, yeah, I mean,
I
yes, of
mean,
course,
how is that an insurrection?
it's pretty crazy. But again,
Especially
that shows you how they can blow things out of proportion very easily,
exactly.
you know?
Exactly. I think that they can take anything and make it look like something. They can
Mhm.
take nothing and make it look like something, and they can take something and make it look like nothing. I
Yeah.
mean, it is absolutely incredible
Mhm.
what can be done with some film, with some actors.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, we've talked about that
Mhm.
before,
Creative
right?
editing, that's all it takes, creative
Creative
editing.
editing.
That's all you gotta do.
And so, it comes down to belief, like what do you really believe? But before the pandemic, the response, right? Before the COVID response, there was this idea or this thing that was floating around, the free floating fear
Mhm.
and isolation. Like a
Yeah.
mass isolation had begun. People getting behind their computers, behind their phones, not really connecting with each other. I really think that really supported the foundation for a lot of the apathy that we're seeing today.
Yeah,
I
I would
mean,
agree.
I really think that because of what was going on before COVID happened, it was like what they call, with mass formation psychosis, and then
Mhm.
they're really talking about there that has to be a key element. That apathy for life, that apathy for um, connection and people, because and I know about this personally because I connect with people in different communities because I love understanding culture and different types of culture. There are so many subcultures in America. I mean, it would blow your mind if you knew how many subcultures in America there are, right?
Yeah.
But there's some subcultures that revel in isolation. They openly say and support self harm, coming from a perspective of if you know self harm, then you also know self pleasure. I
Hmm.
mean, it's this thinking where if you really get into this, this really dark thing, then you can also understand this really beautiful opening and pleasurable thing. And with that, I don't know how I feel about that. I've got mixed feelings about that. Like
Yeah, that's interesting.
I'd love to have somebody come on and talk about what was called kink culture. Like
Yeah.
I really want to get into that because it is fascinating. And at the same time, I don't know if I agree with all of the concepts
Mhm.
that's supporting that. So back to the apathy thing. Well, if we have some subcultures that are supporting the indifference or the separation of um, or dichotomy. Let's talk about it as a
Mhm.
dichotomy
Yeah.
because it really is. There's just a concern that the lack of compassion for others outside of your little bubble, because you all agree, can be kind of squanched. Like, oh, who cares about Canada? I'm in America. That's never going to happen here. Well, I think that is very short-sighted because it did happen here.
That's true. I mean, it's really difficult to sort all this hypocrisy out because, the people who are apathetic about Canadians being, essentially pushed down and disenfranchised entirely, and suppressed. I mean, oppressed, I guess, I mean, it's really that's what they're doing. And what I'm amazed by is this is the same people who would get mad at you for not wearing a mask, things like that. It boggles my mind because I can't work it out in my head how you could go down that road and not understand what has been going on. But again, we're dealing with like levels of propaganda in this country that are just absolutely insane at this point.
Yeah.
I can't even put it into words how bad it is. I mean, especially when you step back from it for a while. That's the problem. I think a lot of people have not stepped back fully and really turned off the television for a while and then turned it back on again.
Right.
And I think that's what I've done over the past several years. After 2016, I kind of started to limit the amount that I watched the news at night. I would watch it occasionally just to dip in and check where the narratives are on both sides, or whatever side you think you might be on, and then kind of step back and just get my things from sources that weren't in the mainstream. So it's tough because a lot of what we're seeing with all of this fear is completely um driven by this propaganda that we are seeing day in and day out. I mean, this happened also in around 2016, leading up to that election, where you couldn't turn on the radio for more than 10 seconds without hearing the name Trump. It was there was not I couldn't believe it. I did a test. I just turned on a news station, and within the first 2, 5, 10 seconds, there was the name Trump was mentioned at some
Mhm.
point in those first few seconds of listening
Mhm.
time.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's just amazing to me that, when you focus on something so strongly, I mean, bad things are going to happen. And that's what's going on now. I mean, they focused so hard on, well, wearing your mask is good for the populace. Getting a vaccine is good for the populace. And everything now has turned on its head, where it's like, well, masks were pretty much useless, which we know from the studies that were done. Some countries that didn't use masks at all did better than some countries that did. Same thing with the vaccines. Look at Israel; the cases are soaring, and they're all quadruple vaxxed in
Right.
Israel. And it's just so I can't I'm at a loss for words to rectify that dichotomy that we're talking about here, where people could see that that they could be apathetic about the oppression of a people literally just for honking their horns in their trucks. But they can be okay with locking down for 2 years straight after we were supposed to be only locked down for 2 weeks.
Right.
And all these emergency powers given to all these governors that could just literally just put do whatever they want to their people. So
I can tell you it
oh
probably has a lot to do with being invested in that narrative, like personally invested.
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, I know people who, are in the medical industry, family members even that are
Hmm.
pharmacists, and initially they were kind of like questioning things. What about hydroxychloroquine? What
Yeah.
about
And there's
ivermectin?
still a lot of questions left to be asked about that, because that
Right.
made no sense to me at all. Nothing.
None.
None.
Well, it makes sense if you're trying to push
If
some
you're trying to
other
push a
thing.
vaccine,
Yeah,
exactly. If you're trying to push something
makes
and
perfect
you're
sense.
because they stockpiled a whole bunch of HCQ, and what happened to that stockpile?
Oh
Where is
yeah,
it?
yeah,
What went on with that? Where did it go? They're like, "Oh,
exactly.
we're stockpiling it, but you can only get it in an emergency." What
I'm
is that? What
sorry.
is that?
I
So in other
thought
words,
this wasn't a
you're preventing us from getting something that could make us better, and I know multiple people who took hydroxychloroquine. I mean, it's an incredibly safe drug. It's
Mhm.
ridiculous to think that it was like, that I don't understand how that, and there's even some studies that showed that some countries that were taking HCQ regularly for malaria had much lower instances of COVID. So,
Exactly.
but then we start to talk about emergency authorization and how that can be put into effect only if there's not another cure out there or another treatment out there that's working. So,
Right. Yeah,
you start to
exactly.
see follow the money. You start to follow the money, and then you start to see what could be, something that could be very easily nefarious. Once you put money into anything, it just starts to go downhill. Motivations can all be questioned once money's
Yes.
involved.
Absolutely. And there was a little gaslighting recently when, Trudeau and his people got up there, and there was, I don't know if she was some type of person associated with there, but and she got up there and she started saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to freeze bank accounts. We're going to do this. And
Yes, I saw her. Yeah.
she said, follow the money. And I just about lost it. I was like, did she just
She
say?
just co-opted. She co-opted the phrase that's used by millions of people. When they
Right.
want to go through these narratives, and they go follow the
Right.
money.
I
And yeah,
was
they co-opt things all the time. That's a very common tactic.
They do. They do. And why would you guys do that? Let's talk about the money. And nobody's challenging that.
Yep.
Nobody is challenging in that arena. None of the journalists. and none of the news. I think I'm most angry at the news, at the people who provide us with the news, that they're not challenging it.
Mhm.
Well, and it also goes hand in hand with what's happening with the schools and the school system right now. So my husband works for a store that provides, you know, stuff, the things for teachers, supplies for teachers and parents to help their kids. He gets
Mhm.
teachers in there all the time. He gets administrators in there. He gets owners of daycares in there. And one daycare owner literally told him that the money they're giving me right now, I could retire on. I could retire and then some. He's the owner of a daycare, and he's talking about government funds or funds allocated for daycares and schools for keeping kids masked and pushing the vaccines.
Wow.
That's what he was talking about. And literally, all that money that's going to these schools and these organizations that are suppressing children, it's going to administrators, not going to the teachers. I can tell you that.
No, of course not. Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
never going to go to the
Oh, yeah.
teachers,
No,
because
it
what
wouldn't.
they want is the teachers to pull back so that education can still stay online. And they need less teachers in order to do that, right? Because they have contracts and they have deals with the government for technology and online learning. So, and this was done years ago, years.
Wow.
So,
That's incredible.
talking about following the money,
Mhm.
like, hello, we're living it, and people who are administrators are getting this money, and is so sad. Okay, let's talk about apathy there.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, and if you look at, and Richard Wolff talked about this, and a lot of other people have talked, but in the last 2 years, we've seen the biggest transfer of wealth
Mhm,
in the nation's history,
that's right.
from the bottom to the top, bottom to the top, essentially. So yeah, I mean, all the mom and pop shops during this entire last 2 years, so many thousands of them closed. And
That's
all
right.
the big corporations, were completely open and delivering and doing all this stuff and had all the funds they needed and were able to do whatever they felt like doing. But all the mom and pop shops were closing
Why
shop.
doesn't that raise flags for
It
people?
doesn't, because people,
Why?
you know what it is? Again, it's we're talking about propaganda, and you get people like you and I who have an open mind and can kind of logically come to conclusions, no different than Joe Rogan or Robert Malone or any of these people that are being ousted from society practically for speaking their mind and using logic and
Mhm,
reason to
mhm.
lead themselves down a road. You start to be called, these people are called conspiracy theorists, and they're crazies. And but being crazy now just means you're ahead of the game, because in 6 months it's probably going to come true, and then
Right.
they're going to say, oh yeah, of course it was true. Yeah, I mean, we all knew that. But and this gets back to some of the other conversations we've had. They need permission to do all this stuff. No different than a
Mm,
mandate. A mandate is only a mandate if you follow them.
it's not
There's
law.
no law. There has not been a law this entire time. So, the fact that
Mhm,
they're doing all of this and we're just allowing it is that apathy and that fear being manifest in
mhm.
the populace right now. I mean, and
Right.
and it's still there underlying, but governments and people who want to basically control you will find a way to use that fear against you. That's what it
Yes.
is, and that goes
Yes.
even interpersonal relationships too. I mean, you probably have dealt with this plenty, and seen this countless times, and I have as well in my interpersonal relationships. They will find a way to get that fear to control you to whatever their ends are that they want you to, want you to further.
Yep.
And that's what's been happening for the last 2 years, and people are just too scared to realize it, and they will just buckle down and go, "Oh, what am I going to do? They're the government. I can't. I don't have any control." Well, we're watching that control, you know, kind of wane in
Mm,
Canada right now.
mm,
They are creating this bravery that Americans really have needed to create over the last, God, it's going on. I don't know how many decades now that we really
right.
have been just going down this rabbit hole, just steadily closing the society, and everything's just closing up. All the things that Naomi Wolf, talked about in her, End of America speeches are all coming true. And
Right.
she's floored by it, because I mean, I've seen some of her comments about some of this stuff, and she's like, this is exactly what we talked about. It's scary stuff. This is a closing
Exactly.
society, and people just don't recognize it because they're too scared to, and
I think yes, fear for sure,
yeah.
but it also, I think, sometimes comes from a place where people want to do the right thing,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Because
Absolutely.
there's the right and wrong inside
Hmm.
of us. And so if we think that we're doing the right thing, we feel good about it. If we think that we're doing the wrong thing because somebody told us it's the wrong thing, then we feel bad about it. So
Yep.
I know I'm making it oversimplified, but I was just talking with someone earlier today about this very thing. If you have a belief that you're doing right or good, then you feel good about yourself. If you have a belief that you're doing something wrong, you're going to feel guilt, remorse, shame. Those are programs from when we were little,
Oh
right?
yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Like those are programs, those are ingrained programs in our core to our being that say, oh, well, if you're doing the wrong thing, you're going to get in trouble, and you
Yep.
don't want to be in trouble, or you don't want to have this feeling of shame. We're going to shame you.
Yeah.
Like people who are being called conspiracy theorists, they're supposed to feel shamed,
Oh, of
right?
course. Yes,
Or
absolutely. Yeah.
all
The
this
connotation
feeling.
immediately. That's what that was the whole idea. Conspiracy theorist is nothing more than an investigator.
That's
It's a
right.
person using logic and reason to go down a road that likely is the end result of what they're seeing. That's no
Could
different than
be,
an
maybe not.
investigator that could be a cop, that could be a
Right.
detective.
Right.
But the conspiracy theorists immediately are like, oh, you're an idiot, obviously. That's the connotation, and that's what they wanted from it. So that's why that
Exactly.
phrase is used constantly. And it's obviously an insult now than it is anything else.
Supposed to be, right?
Hmm.
It's
Yep.
supposed to be just like anti-vax.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
and
Yeah, and that's the thing. I've gotten that a million times, of course. I've even gotten told that I was a murderer. I mean, seriously, like even to my face, I was just like, this is
see, but
crazy.
and that's it's just programming. It's
Hmm.
just programming because I can
Exactly.
tell you, somebody who would call me that like an anti, which I've had people who were in my inner circle call me that, and it's supposed to offend me. But what I know about vaccines since for years, over 20 years, what I like to say is 1% of me, 1% of the time, I say no to one thing. That's it.
Yep.
99% of my life is natural and energetic solutions.
Yep.
So
Exactly. Yep.
so it makes no sense for somebody to call me something that I do 1% of the time to one thing, you know?
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
So I look at it like, God, what an idiot.
Yep. Well, yeah, I mean,
Calling me an
but
idiot.
that's the same. It's the same stigma that goes on to even criminals. Let's say, and I forget exactly which movie it was, but it's a movie where it's just recently. I think Paul I forget who was in it, but the premise of the movie was that there was on an officer that went to prison for something, and he was talking to another officer in the prison yard or whatever, and the officer was like, "Well, I've been painted this and that because I did this one bad thing. I beat this guy up and nearly to a pulp, and now I'm
Mm,
serving all this time." And he's like, "I was dishonorably discharged from the Marines, and all this other stuff." And the actor says to the guy, he says, "Well, look," he's like, "for me, that makes you 1% a felon and 99% Marine. So,
mhm,
just
mhm.
because of that one thing that you've done does not define who you are as a person. So, you know,
Absolutely.
don't be thinking in that way. You are still a Marine in my eyes. You're 99% Marine and you're 1%. That one instance that you had that brought you here.
Yes. And so when people who have these instruments for propaganda
Hmm.
focus on that one thing and blow it up, like this hyperinflation, right?
Yep. Exactly. Yep.
Of this one thing and blow it up, and that's what we should be questioning.
Yeah, that's a
Why?
pretty typical response from most Americans generally.
Mhm.
We tend to speak in hyperbole and very very large terms over things that really don't need that. And my camera's
Right.
completely glitching.
I know, I'm
Yeah, I'm
noticing. I'm
hoping
like,
this
I wonder if he
can.
sees that.
I have a new camera, so I don't know. I might have to return this thing. So,
We'll
but
see. Well,
yeah,
we're just about done, so it's all good.
cool.
Thank you, man. This was a great conversation because
Yeah, no, it really is an interesting conversation, and I really would like to get people on the other side of it because I don't, a lot of these things, and I wonder. I mean, not to be a jerk, I just wonder if people even think about that hypocrisy
yeah, I'm
that they're
curious
obviously
too.
displaying because it really does seem to be so glaring to certain people and so not glaring to others, where they just go, well, what's the? I don't understand. What's the problem? Why don't you understand? And it really does feel like some people are living in their own own reality, and that's kind of
Mhm.
where we've come, and that's why a lot of talk has been brought out, lately. A lot of the propaganda has been leading towards civil war, where
That's
they're like,
right.
oh, we're this close to a civil war. I don't know that we are. I think that that's also
Mm.
hyperbole, but
Mm.
I do think that people are living in different realities in this country at this time, which is pretty
Yes.
scary.
Yes.
But that's not surprising. People are individuals. They're going to have different realities. That's just how it is.
Absolutely, and, there's nothing civil about war,
Yep.
so there's like,
Yeah.
I don't like to use that term, just
Yeah,
like I
absolutely.
don't like to use these other terms where we talk about people
These are
in.
brainwashing terms. Yeah.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
even, like, calling people sheep, or, like, those kinds of terms, like, I think it dehumanizes.
Yeah.
So.
Mostly peaceful.
Right. I mean, it's just I don't like and this is part of our conversation to bring humanity back to relating to each other, because
Hmm.
if we can't do that, then how are we going to live together? It's not
Yeah.
going to work, right?
Yeah.
But we'd love to hear from you guys. We'd love to have people on that have other types of opinions other than our own. We really want to learn and grow and understand. So if you're interested in being on the show, we'd love to talk to you.
Hmm.
Email us at impossibleconversations@yahoo.com. You can find us on YouTube and LinkedIn and obviously Facebook. We're on Odyssey and Minds, and we're everywhere because why not,
Yeah.
right?
Might as well. Might as well.
Why not? And
Put it
we're
out
on
there.
Rumble. On Rumble too. So
Yep.
some of the shows that we can't show on Facebook and
Yes.
YouTube,
And YouTube
we're
especially. Yep.
we're on Rumble as well.
And we have
So
one of those coming up that we might have to chop up a bit, then, but it
that's
should be good.
exciting.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
gonna be exciting. But yeah, some of the conversations are difficult on certain platforms that are not very free speech friendly, or at least conversation friendly, because that's all these really are at the
right.
end of the day. We're not, these are just thoughts.
And it is what it is. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Because
Hmm.
for me, where there's a will, there's a way. So
Yeah.
I don't care if you tell me no, because
Yeah.
I will find another way
Absolutely.
to be seen and heard and known.
Yep.
So that's what
Definitely.
I feel. So thanks, Sean. Thanks for joining us, and
Thank you, Brandy. Appreciate
thank
it.
you guys. We really appreciate you, and